They laughed when he rode away, but he returned with 12 graves to fill. They laughed, all 12 of them, laughed as if a man's dignity were just another game played in the dust, as if breaking Jeb Callahan in front of the whole town was just Saturday afternoon sport. They stood lined up on the porch of Dusthaven's only saloon, boots cocked up on the rail, tobacco spit soaking the dry planks. 12 men who weren't brave enough to face him alone, but mighty bold when they had a rope, a sheriff, and Silas Crane on their side. The sky above was the color of scorched bone, and the sun blistered the boards beneath their heels. Dogs barked in the distance. The bell at the chapel tower hadn't rung that morning. Even God seemed to turn his face. Jeb was barefoot. They'd stripped his boots off after dragging him from his bed, accused him of horse theft, of all things. Him, a former scout of the Union Cavalry, a man who once lost 3 fingers saving a boy from a stampede. Now they hauled him like a rustler, wrists bound with rawhide, skin torn raw. And Silas Crane, greedy land baron, voice slick with money and menace, rode beside him with a smirk as wide as the plains. "Thought you could just ride out with my prize mare, huh, Jeb?" Silas shouted, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Guess we found out you ain't as clever as you looked." The crowd swelled on both sides of the street, townsfolk curious and cruel, lining up for the spectacle like it was a festival. A boy tossed a pebble. It struck Jeb's collarbone. Another boy laughed. Women whispered. Old men shook their heads, but no one stepped forward. A rock hit Jeb's ribs. He staggered but didn't fall. Sheriff Amos Blackwell leaned against a hitching post with his arms crossed, grinning like he was watching a stage play. His badge caught the sun, but not the respect of anyone decent. Jeb's shirt was torn open. His back, welted and bleeding, heaved with each breath. The dust clung to his sweat, painting him in mud and humiliation. His lips were split, his eyes swollen, but they still burned. He stumbled forward, driven by jeers, and still he said nothing, not a plea, not a curse, not even a question, not even when Silas yanked him to his knees in front of the saloon. A line of men stood behind the Baron. 12 men, each with a reason to hate Jeb. Some were ranch hands he'd fired for thieving, others were land grabbers he'd exposed. One had a daughter Jeb refused to marry, another a brother Jeb had arrested during the war. Silas gestured with flair. "What's justice without an audience?" Someone dumped a bucket of pig slop. It splashed across Jeb's shoulders. The crowd howled. From above, a curtain fluttered. Mary Beth Crane, Silas's niece, stood at the apothecary window. Her face, pale and drawn, trembled with grief. One hand pressed to the glass, the other clenched in a fist. Her eyes pleaded, but not with Silas, with Jeb. He looked up, not at the sheriff, not at the 12, at her. His eyes locked with hers for one long, searing second. Bloodied, bruised, and half-broken, he stared at her, not with shame, but defiance, as if to say, "You're the only one who sees me. Remember this." Then, slowly, he turned his gaze to the porch. One by one, he looked each man in the eye, all 12. He saw the smirk in the preacher's mouth, the twitch in the gambler's jaw, the glint of guilt behind the banker's mustache, the way Silas's foreman avoided his gaze. Each man, a name burned into the pages of memory. And then, without a word, Jeb spat blood in the dust at their feet. Silas's grin faded. "You're done here, Callahan." The sheriff nodded. "Ain't no place in Dusthaven for a man like you." Jeb's horse, his old half-lame mare with a limp and a scarred flank, waited tied at the edge of town. The reins were frayed, the saddle torn, but the animal stood firm, eyes calm, loyal. They cut Jeb's bindings. He collapsed, then rose slowly, bones shaking but unbroken. The crowd quieted. No one expected him to rise. He limped to his horse, blood streaking down his legs, hair matted with sweat and grit. He mounted, wincing, then turned east, toward the desert, toward exile, toward silence. And then the laughter returned. The same 12 laughed again. The barmaid giggled. The barber clapped. The town drunk raised his bottle. Jeb didn't look back, but in his mind, something shifted. A vow, heavy as stone and sharper than steel, took shape in his chest. 12 men laughed. 12 men would dig. Not today, not tomorrow, but someday. And when that day came, the ground in Dusthaven would drink deeply. He rode until the wind swallowed him whole, until even the sun gave up chasing him. Dusthaven thought it had seen the last of Jeb Callahan, but Jeb Callahan remembered every face, every laugh, every name, and he had 12 graves to fill. Weeks passed, then months. Dusthaven moved on, or at least pretended to. The same horses trotted the same rut-carved path down Main Street. The same poker games, the same prayers, the same sins. But something had changed. There was a silence between bootsteps. A pause between every laugh. A tension in the air that hadn't been there before, like a breath being held. Silas Crane still sat on the saloon porch like a king, surveying a kingdom built on fear. He wore the same black vest, the same gold pocket watch, the same condescending grin. But behind his eyes, something new stirred, not guilt, not regret, worry. They didn't say Jeb Callahan's name aloud, not in the bar, not in the church, not even in their own homes. But the thought of him hung in the wind like a storm scent, faint but rising. His absence had weight, like a chair left warm after someone stands, like a grave with no body. Mary Beth Crane felt it too. She walked slower now, listened more, and she watched her uncle, how he triple-checked the locks on the front door, how he glanced at reflections in windows, how he loaded his pistol each morning like brushing his teeth. She remembered Jeb's eyes when they met hers through the apothecary window, bruised, bleeding, but unbroken. It had haunted her every night since. She began writing him letters she never sent. Small things at first, apologies, questions, half-prayers scribbled in the margins of her ledger. But the words grew heavier. She wrote of the town's rot, of how the sheriff drank more now, of how men who used to laugh loud now watched their own shadows. She folded the pages and tucked them into the family Bible between Psalms and Revelations, beside dried wildflowers he once gave her. Then, one evening near dusk, a rider passed through Perdition's Hollow. He said nothing, wore black from hat to boots. A rifle slung across his back, a knife sheathed in rawhide at his hip. His horse, lean but steady, kicked up the dust like smoke behind him. He stopped for no one, asked for nothing, and left the town chilled. 2 days later, a bounty hunter from Amarillo was found outside Folsom Gulch, throat slit, body buried upright, arms folded across the chest, between his teeth a weathered playing card, the Ace of Graves, scrawled with a red 1. When the news reached Dusthaven, the preacher dropped his chalice. Silas dismissed it. Outlaws kill outlaws, ain't our business. But his hand trembled when he reached for his drink. Then one crisp morning, the sheriff found a strange delivery nailed to the jailhouse door, a strip of tanned leather, old and cracked, with 12 names burned into it, not written, not inked, seared deep with a branding iron. Each name belonged to one of the 12 men who'd laughed when Jeb Callahan was humiliated. Under the names, 4 words: I'm still counting, J. Sheriff Amos Blackwell read it 3 times before folding it into his coat and walking behind the jail. There, he threw up in the alley beside the horses. By nightfall, Silas's gang had gathered in the saloon, tension thick as cigar smoke. Eyes darted, hands twitched near pistol belts. One claimed he'd seen a shadow near his barn. Another swore someone had carved tally marks into his back door. "Cowards!" Silas barked. "He's long dead, just some drifter poking at ghosts." But even Silas now wore his gun indoors. Mary Beth saw it all from the darkened corners of her shop. How fear poisoned men faster than bullets. How pride was peeling away from them like dry bark. And though she feared what Jeb had become, she feared more the men who had made him that way. Then the second card arrived. This one was pinned to the preacher's porch. Same Ace of Graves. This time, the number 2 was scrawled in crimson across the center, the ink still wet when found. Next to it lay the preacher's dog, lifeless, throat cut, tongue missing. No one claimed to hear anything that night. No gunshots, no hooves, just a chill wind that wouldn't stop blowing until sunrise. That Sunday, the church stayed closed. By Monday, the preacher was gone. He left no sermon, no letter, just a padlocked door and a town full of whispers. Some claimed he'd gone to find his peace. Others believed he found something far more permanent, or someone. 2 names were now crossed off the list, and no one laughed. Jeb hadn't ridden away to die. He had ridden away to remember every insult, every shove, every man who took joy in seeing him crawl. And now he was remembering out loud, one grave at a time. Dusthaven, for the first time in memory, was quiet, and Jeb Callahan was just getting started. The wind shifted in Dusthaven. It no longer carried the dry, predictable scent of cattle and cracked earth. Now it brought something sharper. The scent of wood smoke, of old gunpowder, and something that couldn't be named, not exactly, but that curled in the lungs like a warning. Mothers noticed their babies waking at odd hours. Horses spooked without cause. Lamps flickered when no wind blew. And Roy Lancer started drinking in the mornings. Roy had always been a loud man, proud of his laugh and the jingle of coins in his vest. He'd made his name at the poker table, bluffing drunk ranchers and cheating travelers who didn't know better. But his eyes had grown sunken, his hands unsteady. He no longer held his cards with flair. Now he shuffled like a man counting hours, not chips. He was one of the 12, the first to lay hands on Jeb that night, back when Silas dragged him out. Roy had tied the rope tight, too tight, and smiled while doing it. Now he barely slept. One morning, the barkeep found him curled under a table with a revolver in each hand, drenched in sweat and shaking. "He's coming," Roy whispered. "He's already here." The barkeep just nodded. Everyone felt it. No one spoke of the preacher anymore. His church remained closed, doors barred and windows dark. The dog's blood had never quite washed out of the boards. Even the sheriff gave the place a wide berth, and the list, the one branded into leather, now hung behind the bar. Silas had ordered it displayed, as if to mock the legend. "Let him see we're not afraid," he'd said. But they were, because the 3rd grave was coming, and it came at midnight. Roy Lancer stumbled out of the saloon, drunk, muttering to himself. He tried to light a cigar but dropped the match 3 times. He looked around, squinting into the dark. The wind was dead, the street empty, doors bolted, curtains drawn. He reached the livery to fetch his horse. That's when he saw it. A playing card. Tacked to the stall with a knife, ace of graves, marked with a 3. Roy turned, and there he was, a shadow between shadows, the man in black. He stepped forward slowly, not speaking. His boots made no sound. His coat moved like smoke. Roy backed away, hands up, breath catching. Jeb?" he choked. Still no answer. Jeb's face was half hidden beneath the brim of his hat. But his eyes, they burned, not with fury, not even hate, something colder. A silence that spoke louder than any scream. I was drunk that night," Roy stammered. "Silas made me. We all just—" Jeb tossed something at his feet. Rope, frayed, familiar. Roy fell to his knees. "Please, I got a son now, little one. You remember Ellie? She's gone now, but—" Jeb pointed to the shovel leaning against the wall. No, you can't." "I'm not ready. I'm not—" But Jeb had already turned. Roy looked down. The card, the rope, the shovel. He screamed. The sound echoed into the hills, bounced off canyon walls, and was swallowed whole by the desert. The next morning, the townsfolk found a grave behind the livery, freshly dug, simple, silent. A spade stuck in the dirt, the playing card pinned to the mound. The same rope used to bind Jeb months before now, wrapped around the base of the crude marker. Sheriff Blackwell said nothing. He didn't need to. 3 down, 9 to go. Mary Beth heard the news before the sun rose. She opened her window and stood in the chill air, clutching a shawl around her shoulders. She saw Silas pacing below, barking orders to armed men who'd never even been in a real fight. men who shook when the wind rattled the sign over the general store. He knew, the townsfolk knew, and Mary Beth knew best of all. Jeb Callahan was not a ghost. He was flesh and blood, and he had walked into town under a full moon and left it with another name carved in ash. That night a rider was seen on the ridge, still, watching, waiting. Dusthaven lit torches. Jeb needed none. Dusthaven stopped sleeping. Doors that once creaked open at dawn now remained latched until full light. The town square, once bustling with chatter and hooves, had gone quiet. Even the saloon was subdued. No piano, no brawls, only low murmurs and glasses clinking nervously, like they knew something was listening. Because 3 were gone, and 9 remained. They had buried Roy Lancer in silence. No preacher, no cross, no sermon, just a pine box and a lot of eyes refusing to meet one another. Some men said it was justice, others said it was Jeb's justice, and that made it something different, darker. Silas Crane still postured, but even his voice had changed. He barked more than he spoke, paced more than he sat. He added more names to his payroll. 2 bounty hunters, a drifter with a steel eye, and a gunman known only as Dutch. But the town knew none of them would matter. Jeb Callahan wasn't coming through the front door. He was already inside. It wasn't just fear that haunted Dusthaven. It was shame. The kind that worms into your bones. The kind that keeps a man staring at his boots long after the conversation ends. Because they hadn't just let it happen. They'd laughed. And now one of those men, Pastor Elbridge Mallory, began locking the church doors by sundown. Mallory had stood on that saloon porch with the rest. He hadn't touched Jeb, but he hadn't stopped it either. He'd chuckled with the others, handed Silas his cane, and quoted a twisted bit of scripture about humility and punishment. Now he preached to half-empty pews. "Fear not the sword of man," he said one Sunday, voice shaking over his Bible, "but fear the judgment of heaven." People fidgeted, looked at the door. No one said, "Amen." That night he dreamt of fire. He awoke with sweat on his collar and a taste of ash in his throat. He went to the chapel to pray, but the front door had been left open. Inside, nothing was stolen. Nothing was broken, except the Bible. His family's old leather-bound King James, handed down through generations, now lay in 2 halves, split down the spine, splayed open on the pulpit. Someone had carved a word into the wood beneath it. "Accounted." Mallory backed away from the altar like it had started bleeding. He didn't sleep the next night, or the one after. He walked the chapel halls muttering psalms, lantern in hand. Every creak of the wood made him jump. Every gust of wind made him clutch his chest. Then, on the 3rd night, it came. The church bell rang once, loud, sharp. No one had pulled the rope. He stepped outside into the moonlight, heart pounding, and there he was, Jeb Callahan, standing at the bottom of the steps. No rifle, no knife, just a shovel. Pastor Mallory opened his mouth, but no words came. Jeb said nothing. He climbed the steps slowly, handed the shovel to the preacher, and pointed to the graveyard behind the church. "You can't," Mallory whispered. "You can't make me." Jeb tilted his head. Not cruel, not angry, just certain. Mallory staggered back. "You don't understand. I didn't mean... I was afraid. We were all afraid." Jeb stepped aside. Mallory looked past him, into the moonlit field behind the chapel. Empty ground, no cross, no stone, just space, just silence, just room for one more. The preacher wept. "I've given my whole life to the Lord. I've begged for mercy." Jeb looked toward the church, and then at the Bible. Mallory followed his gaze. I'll do it," he said quietly. "I'll dig it, but let me die with a cross over my head." Jeb nodded once. By dawn, a new grave lay behind the church. Inside it, a man broken by the weight of a book, by the echo of his own voice on that saloon porch, by the silence of the man he could not face. When townsfolk arrived for morning prayer, they found a single black card nailed to the chapel door. Ace of Graves, number 4, and the word beneath it, "Forgiven." The rest of the day passed like a funeral march. The barber locked up early. The stable hand asked to leave town. Even Silas didn't speak for hours. He sat in his office, staring at nothing, the sound of flies buzzing near the window. Mary Beth found herself in the graveyard that afternoon, standing by the preacher's fresh mound. She noticed the shovel stuck in the earth still bore the preacher's handprint. Jeb had let him dig it, had let him choose. That meant something. It meant there was still a line between vengeance and cruelty, but the ground was running out. And 5 more men were already afraid of where they'd be standing when that line vanished. By the time the 5th man died, Dusthaven wasn't just afraid. It was turning on itself. Trust, once traded freely between neighbors, now came with a price. Men began carrying their own bullets in secret, loading their guns alone. A sneeze behind a door could clear a saloon. A stranger asking for water could be met with a cocked rifle. And the laughter, the one that had once filled the town the day Jeb was shamed, had dried up like the riverbed west of town. It wasn't just death anymore. It was the dread of being next. Among the 12, Harlan Crowley had never been known for patience. He was Silas's foreman, muscle enforcer, the kind of man who never asked twice and never knocked before kicking in a door. The kind of man who bragged about cracking a rancher's jaw just for disagreeing on cattle count. Now he barely slept without a pistol under his pillow. He was one of the roughest that night, held Jeb down when he struggled, laughed in his face, even kicked him when he was on the ground. "Gotta learn his place," he'd said, loud enough for the crowd to hear. Now he flinched at the sound of his own name. Silas tried to keep order, barking commands like a general about to lose his army. But the remaining men, 8 now, were unraveling fast. They whispered in corners, hid flasks in their boots. Some swore Jeb wouldn't come for them if they repented, if they made a deal, if they turned on Silas first. One man, Jacob Finch, tried to flee, took his horse in the middle of the night and rode north. He made it as far as Sands Hollow. They found him 3 days later in a dry well, neck snapped, fingers missing, a playing card pinned to his vest, Ace of Graves, number 5. But that wasn't what made Dusthaven tremble. It was what had been carved into his chest. Cowards dig deeper. The town held its breath. 5 gone, 7 left, and no one dared be the 6th. Mary Beth watched the men closest to Silas change shape, not in their faces, but in their eyes. They stopped looking like wolves and started looking like trapped dogs, that edge of panic, that slow realization that the pack wasn't safe anymore. One by one, they stopped riding out together. And Harlan, brutal, grunting Harlan, started staying close to the saloon, drinking from dawn to dusk, muttering to himself, counting things on his fingers that no one else could see. Silas called a meeting, all 7 of them, inside the saloon. Doors locked, shades drawn. He slammed his fist on the poker table. "He's playing with us, one by one, pulling strings. You want to die hiding under your beds like children?" No one answered. "You all laughed," Silas snapped. "Same as me. So you die same as me if you don't do something?" One of the men, Eli Markham, finally said it. "You dragged him into that street. We just followed." Silas's eyes narrowed. "You saying this is my fault?" Harlan stood up, swaying. "You made the fire. Don't look surprised that it's burning." Silas reached for his gun. Harlan was faster, but it wasn't bullets they drew. It was words, accusations, regrets, truths that had never been spoken aloud. "You gave the order. You let him bleed. You said no one would care." Mary Beth was upstairs, above the saloon, listening through the floorboards. She heard glasses shatter. She heard boots scrape. She heard the last thing Harlan said before he walked out. "Maybe it ain't Jeb we need to fear. Maybe it's what we all became." No one followed him. Hours later, a scream tore through the stables. They found Harlan hanging from a rafter, but not by a noose, by the same rawhide rope they had once used on Jeb Callahan. His boots were gone. His hat crushed in the mud, a playing card pinned to the beam above his head, Ace of Graves, number 6. But someone else found something the others didn't. Sheriff Blackwell, rummaging through Harlan's coat, found a note written in blood. "I told you. I remember." That night, No lamps burned in Dusthaven. The town went dark, and Silas sat in his office alone, pouring bourbon into a chipped glass with shaking hands. Not even the sheriff stayed nearby now. The men he paid no longer saluted him. They just nodded, cold and silent, like they knew the storm had passed his door. Only Mary Beth entered. She stood in the doorway, eyes sharp as polished glass. "You can't outrun this," she said. Silas didn't look at her. "I don't intend to," he replied. But even he knew that was a lie. The sheriff had a rhythm. Every morning at 6, Sheriff Amos Blackwell would unlock his door, step outside, light his pipe, and make a slow walk around the jailhouse. He used to do it with swagger, chest forward, boots polished, hand resting on the hilt of his revolver like he expected a story to start at any second. But that was before Jeb Callahan came back from the dust. Now, Amos walked with his shoulders slightly hunched. His pipe burned down before he remembered to smoke it. He'd stopped looking men in the eye. He noticed details now. The way the wind moved a curtain, the way nails creaked in porchwood, the way a shovel stood too perfectly upright beside a fence. And every time he reached the back alley behind the jail, he paused. That's where he had thrown up the day the leather list appeared. He hadn't told anyone, but his name was on that list, near the top. He hadn't laughed, not like the others, but he hadn't stopped it either. He'd looked the other way while Silas humiliated Jeb, while Harlan held him down, while Roy kicked him, while the town cheered. He told himself it was politics, that you didn't cross a man like Silas Crane unless you wanted your house torched and your wife spat on. But now the excuses had dried up. All that remained was the silence of the dead and the fear of the living. And the list. 6 names crossed out. 6 still breathing. He started sleeping in the jailhouse, too afraid to go home. He barred the windows. He kept the oil lamps burning all night. He cleaned his gun 3 times a day. At night he stared at the ceiling, picturing the moment when Jeb would step through the door. Not screaming, not shooting, just staring, with those cold, quiet eyes that saw straight through lies. Amos tried to prepare. He rewrote his will. He burned old letters. He buried his father's watch under the floorboards like it could anchor something real. And on the 7th day after Harlan's death, he wrote a note and left it on his desk. "No one is innocent, not even me." That night it happened. A sound, not loud, not sharp, more like a sigh. He stood up, gun drawn, boots heavy. The lamp flickered once. Then again. He walked to the front of the jailhouse. There was no one outside, no horses, no voices. But on the wooden steps, resting neatly, was a badge. His badge. He hadn't lost it. He'd been wearing it on his chest an hour ago. He looked down. It was gone. His hands began to shake. He backed up into the shadows of the office. His breathing grew shallow. The revolver felt heavier than usual. The walls closed in. He turned to bolt the door and found Jeb already inside, standing in the back hallway, silent. He hadn't heard the door open. He hadn't heard a thing. Jeb didn't speak. He didn't have to. The sheriff lowered the gun. "I knew you'd come," he said, voice dry. Jeb stepped forward. "I didn't stop them," Amos whispered. "But I wanted to." Jeb said nothing. "I thought, if I let them do it, maybe it'd be over. Maybe it'd be cleaner than the rope." Still, silence. "I was wrong." He reached over to the desk, hand trembling, and pulled open the drawer. Inside was a key, small, brass, unremarkable. He slid it across the desk. Jeb looked down at it. "That's the back gate to the cemetery," Amos said. "I'll walk with you." Jeb blinked once, then turned. The 2 men walked in silence through the night, boots crunching gravel, the town dead asleep around them. No one saw them pass. No dogs barked. No lamps flickered. At the cemetery, Amos took the shovel himself. He dug, slow, shaky. At one point he paused, sweat dripping into his eyes. "You think this makes it right?" Jeb finally spoke. "It makes it finished." They said nothing more. By dawn, the grave was done. Amos sat beside it, legs stretched out, face pale, hands blistered. "I won't ask how," he said. "Just don't let Silas bury me." Jeb nodded and left. They found the sheriff's body slumped beside the hole, not shot, not stabbed, just still, like a man who had finally stopped running. His badge was left pinned to a rock nearby, clean, polished, resting like a tombstone, and on the fresh mound of dirt, a single playing card. Ace of Graves, number 7. No one in town opened their doors that morning. Not until the sun was high and the sky was blue, and even then they moved like shadows, glancing behind them, walking faster than usual, pretending the world hadn't changed. But it had. Jeb Callahan had taken the law from Dusthaven, and Dusthaven didn't ask for it back. 7 graves, 7 men gone, and now the town itself was cracking. No one said it aloud, but Dusthaven was dying, not by drought or by fire, but by fear. Stores opened later, streets emptied before dusk. Children were kept indoors. The schoolhouse closed. Travelers passed without stopping. The town well ran full, but the people walked around it like it might be cursed, because Jeb Callahan was no longer a rumor. He was a pattern, and the pattern said, "You're next." Of the original 12, only 5 remained. Silas Crane sat in his study at the back of the saloon, the shutters nailed shut, the desk covered in empty glasses and unfinished letters. His face had aged 5 years in 5 weeks. The silver in his beard was no longer stylish, it was tired. His voice, once smooth and venomous, now sounded like it scraped against broken glass. He didn't sleep anymore. Not really. He dozed, pistol in hand, and dreamed of boots in the hallway and black eyes in the dark. Outside, Mary Beth watched him rot from within. Her uncle had never been kind, but he had been sharp. Now, he looked like a man surrounded by ghosts he couldn't shoot. And when she asked about his plans, he snapped. When she offered help, he growled, so she said nothing. But that didn't mean she was idle. She began visiting each grave, quietly, alone. The preacher, the gambler, the sheriff, the foreman, each one freshly turned, the dirt still settling, the wind still brushing across the wood markers like a breath. She kept a notebook. She drew maps. She began to see what no one else had noticed. Jeb wasn't killing at random. The graves weren't scattered. They formed a circle, wide, uneven, but deliberate. Like he was closing in, drawing a line around something, around someone, around Silas. She showed it to the blacksmith, then to the stable boy. Each man blinked at the page like it was some kind of sorcery. But once they saw it, they couldn't unsee it. The names, the spots, the angles. "He's herding him," the blacksmith muttered. "Like a wolf," the boy whispered. Inside the saloon, Silas paced like a lion in a cage. The remaining 4, including Eli Markham and Dutch the gunman, sat with their backs to the wall, fingers tapping on glass and gunmetal. "We're being hunted," Dutch said. "Not challenged, not baited, hunted." Silas slammed the table. "Then we hunt back." But no one moved. They had tried that already. One of the bounty hunters they hired never even returned. The other came back with a hand missing and a playing card sewn to his coat, not pinned, sewn, through flesh and leather. Markham leaned forward. "What if we give him something?" "Like what?" Silas snapped. "An apology." Silas laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. "You want to say sorry to a ghost." But deep down, he was already imagining it, writing it, a letter. He spent the night scratching it out. "Jeb, we were wrong. We were weak. I was a coward. I deserve whatever you decide. Just spare the rest. Leave Dusthaven something to remember besides your graves." He folded it, sealed it, left it on the saloon porch before dawn. When he opened the door the next morning, the letter was still there, but it was no longer sealed. Inside it was a single word, scrawled in rough black charcoal. No. Silas didn't drink that day. He stared at the paper for hours, unmoving. Mary Beth found him there near dusk, face pale, letter in hand, lips whispering something she couldn't hear. She sat beside him for the first time in weeks. "You really thought he'd forgive you?" she asked. Silas looked at her like a man underwater. I thought if I gave him something honest, he'd stop. Mary Beth stared at the horizon. He's not after honesty, he's after balance. Silas turned sharply. You've spoken to him. She didn't answer. He stood. Have you? Still, she said nothing. He stepped closer. If you see him again, tell him I still got fight in me. Mary Beth didn't flinch. You're not who he's fighting anymore. That night, 2 more men vanished. Eli Markham and Dutch. Gone without a scream. No blood, no sign of struggle. In their place, 2 graves, side by side, dug behind the old livery barn, and on the fence post above them, 2 playing cards fluttering in the wind. 8, 9, pinned with the same nail. Mary Beth stood over them in the morning light, notebook in hand. The circle was nearly complete. The only names left were 2, and she already knew how this would end. Dusthaven stood still. Not a windmill turned, not a door creaked. Not a single horse stirred in its stall. It was as if the very air had frozen, holding its breath, waiting for something it couldn't name but knew was coming. 9 graves, only 3 names left. But one of them was just a girl. At least, that's what Silas Crane still told himself. He sat alone in the upstairs room of the saloon, facing the window, though the shutters were drawn. His fingers played unconsciously with the handle of his revolver, not cleaning it, not cocking it, just touching it. As if the metal grounded him. He hadn't spoken a full sentence in 2 days. The deaths of Markham and Dutch had broken something in him. They were supposed to be killers, hardened men who didn't flinch at screams. They'd promised him protection. Now they were fertilizer behind the livery. He didn't even bother to bury them. What was the point? It would only be 10 graves instead of 9. The number didn't matter anymore. Only his did. Silas hadn't seen Mary Beth in over a day, and that scared him more than the silence. She'd stopped bringing him food, stopped checking on him, stopped asking if he'd slept. He knew she was still in town. The apothecary candle still burned at night. But she didn't come. Not after he grabbed her arm and accused her of writing to Jeb. She didn't yell. She just looked at him like a stranger and pulled her arm away. Now he sat in the dark, waiting. And that's when the fire started. It wasn't large, not at first. Just a flicker in the dry grass behind the preacher's old chapel, but the wind caught it, twisted it, fed it. Within minutes, orange tongues licked the roof. Smoke coiled above the bell tower. Then the flames reached the wood, and the bell rang. But no one had pulled the rope. The town flooded into the street, buckets, blankets, wet shirts. The panic was wild but quiet. No one screamed, as if shouting might summon something worse than fire. Mary Beth stood across the street, eyes fixed on the blaze. She wasn't moving, she wasn't helping, because she knew it wasn't just a fire. It was a message. From across the flame, through the smoke, a rider appeared. Black coat, wide-brimmed hat, horse slick with sweat and dust. Jeb Callahan. He sat still as the town scrambled. His silhouette was unmistakable, framed by the inferno. He made no move toward the saloon. He didn't draw a weapon. He just turned, slow and deliberate, and rode toward the canyon trail. Everyone watched. No one followed. Except Mary Beth. She took her horse and disappeared into the smoke, her satchel bouncing against her side, notebook tucked inside. Silas didn't notice until hours later, when he found her room empty and the circle complete. He opened her notebook, left in the kitchen, next to an untouched bowl of stew. On the last page was a sketch of the 12 grave sites, each marked with an X. And in the center of the circle, drawn carefully in red ink, the saloon. He dropped the book, ran upstairs, pulled open the window, and saw it. A final grave dug in the middle of Main Street, waiting. No card, no shovel, no name, just earth. Silas felt something collapse inside him. Not fear, not grief, something worse. Recognition. He holstered his pistol and walked down the stairs, boots thudding like drums in an empty church. Dusthaven watched from behind curtains and cracks. No one spoke. He stepped into the street. No wind, no sound, just the grave. And Jeb. He stood across from it, motionless. Mary Beth sat behind him on her horse, silent, watching. Jeb didn't draw, he didn't speak, he just stepped aside and pointed to the dirt. Silas stared. "You want me to dig?" he said, voice barely there. Jeb said nothing. Silas looked at Mary Beth. She didn't blink. He looked at the town. No one came forward. He dropped to his knees. He began to dig. The soil was soft, fresh, damp. Each shovelful slower than the last. When the hole was chest deep, he stopped, breathing hard, face grey. "I thought I'd be the one with the last word," he said. Jeb finally answered. "You were." Then he turned his back and walked away. Silas stood alone, knee-deep in his own grave. The townspeople stepped into the open, watching from a distance. Mary Beth dismounted. She didn't speak to her uncle. She didn't look at him. She walked to the saloon and closed the door behind her. Silas Crane never finished the grave. He tried for a while, threw 5 more shovels of dirt, but his arms trembled, his knees locked, his vision blurred, the rhythm broke, and then he just sat there, in the pit, back pressed to the dirt wall, hands coated in soil, breathing in short bursts like a man who just escaped drowning, only to realize he was still underwater. He stayed like that until nightfall. No one approached. No one offered a hand. Even the sheriff's office was dark now. The badge still pinned to the rock where they'd found Amos Blackwell's body. The silence of Dusthaven was now complete, a kind of sacred quiet, only broken when Silas clawed his way back out of the grave, hands shaking, breath ragged, muttering to himself, "He's done. 9. That's enough. That's enough." But he knew it wasn't, because only 11 were accounted for, and there had been 12. 1 man left. Not Silas. Not anymore. He stumbled back to the saloon, collapsed into his chair, poured himself 2 fingers of bourbon, and stared at the mirror behind the bar. He looked smaller, not just aged, but shrunken, as if part of him had been eaten from the inside. He touched the glass and whispered the name, Clemens. That was the name no one had spoken. The 12th man. The one who hadn't been in town for weeks. The one who disappeared after Roy Lancer died. Nobody asked where he'd gone. Nobody missed him. He was a banker's son with slick hair, soft hands, and eyes that always scanned the room like a weasel looking for an escape hatch. He hadn't touched Jeb that day, but he'd laughed, louder than any of them. Jeb had remembered, and Silas had forgotten. Now, the game wasn't over. It was just closing in. Mary Beth returned at dawn. She stepped through the saloon door like the place belonged to her. Silas didn't look up. He just stared into the bottom of his glass like it held prophecy. "He's not here for me anymore," he said, voice hoarse. "Is he?" "No," Mary Beth said. "Then who?" She dropped a paper on the bar. A letter, postmarked from Sacramento. In it, a short note. "To whom it may concern, Clemens Merriweather has resigned his post effective immediately. He has taken passage east, destination undisclosed." Silas read it twice, then again. Then he laughed, a dry, hollow sound that rattled in his throat and died before reaching the air. "He's running," Mary Beth nodded. "So was everyone," she said. Silas poured her a drink. She didn't touch it. They sat in silence until dusk. And then, outside, hoofbeats. Slow, measured. The sound of a man who wasn't hurrying. The townsfolk parted like mist. No one called out. No one asked who it was. They already knew. Jeb Callahan. He rode to the center of the street, dismounted, left the horse untied, reins trailing. He walked to the saloon door. Silas stood before he entered. Mary Beth moved to the side. When Jeb stepped through, he didn't look around. His eyes went straight to Silas. No gun, no card, no shovel, just silence. "I'm not the last," Silas said, voice barely above a whisper. Jeb didn't nod, didn't speak, just waited. Silas walked behind the bar, opened the drawer where he kept the map, the one Mary Beth had drawn, the circle of graves, the pattern, and unfolded it slowly. He added a mark, a final X, far beyond the edge of the town, east. Jeb took it, folded it once, slipped it into his coat. Then he turned, walked out the door, and left Dusthaven behind. No gunfight, no final scream, no grave number 12, not yet, just a map and a destination. That night a storm rolled in from the north. Lightning cracked over the hills. Thunder echoed like cannon fire. The saloon's windows rattled in their frames. But the grave in the street held its shape. The wind couldn't touch it. And Silas Crane, still alive, sat alone in the dark. Saved, but not spared. The road east was quiet, wider than the trails near Dusthaven, flatter too. The trees were sparser, the wind slower, the sky hung heavier overhead, as if the land itself knew what Jeb Callahan carried. He didn't ride fast. He didn't need to. The name in his mind now wasn't one of the loud ones, not a man who barked orders or threw punches, not a man who held ropes or kicked ribs. No, Clemens Merriweather had never dirtied his hands. But he had laughed loud, and then vanished. Not from guilt, not from fear, but from entitlement, as if his part was done, as if the dust of Jeb Callahan could be brushed off like lint on a banker's lapel. But Jeb didn't forget. Not that face, not that smirk. And now, after 11 names carved into the earth, only his remained. Jeb rode into a town called Willowridge near dusk. The sign was faded, the people clean, quiet, polite in the way city edge folk were, distant but not unkind. He tied his horse outside the post office and asked only one question. "Where's the banker?" The clerk gave him an address without hesitation. "He's got a room above the tailor's shop," she said. "Third window, left side." Jeb didn't knock. He climbed the back stairs slow. Every creak of the wood felt like thunder in his boots. At the top he paused. The door was open. Clemens sat at a desk, surrounded by ledgers, papers, letters. He wore a white shirt, crisp, clean. He turned slowly, already pale. He didn't speak, not right away, just stared. "You're not dead," he finally said. "No," Jeb replied. "You came all this way, just for me." Jeb said nothing. Clemens stood, hands raised halfway, like that might matter. "I didn't hurt you. I never laid a hand." "You laughed," Jeb said, calm and flat. Clemens's breath caught. I was young. I didn't think you did." Jeb stepped forward. "I was scared," Clemens said. "Silas was. They all were. I didn't have a choice." Jeb looked at the desk, at the window, at the pen still dripping ink beside a half-finished ledger. "You had a voice," he said. "You had a mouth. You chose how to use it." Clemens backed against the wall. "You've already made your point. You've killed enough." Jeb pulled something from his coat. A spade, worn, stained. He handed it to Clemens. "Downstairs, behind the shop. Soil's soft." Clemens froze. "You want me to dig?" Jeb didn't answer. "You're a monster," Clemens whispered. Jeb looked him in the eyes. "I became one in your town." And then he turned, walked to the window, opened it, let the breeze in. Clemens stood for a long time, staring at the spade in his hands. Then he followed. Behind the shop, under the shadow of a willow tree, he dug. Not quickly, not defiantly, but like a man carrying bricks in his spine. Jeb watched, said nothing. When the hole was waist-deep, Clemens stopped. He looked up, breathless, furious, pleading. Jeb handed him a small folded object, a playing card, the Ace of Graves, the number 12 written in clean black ink. Clemens stared at it. "Do it then," he said. "If you came all this way, finish it." But Jeb shook his head. "I'm done." He dropped the card into the grave, turned, and walked away. Clemens called after him. "Why now? Why stop now?" Jeb didn't turn, didn't look back, because vengeance has a rhythm, but it doesn't have an end. Not unless you choose one. And he had chosen. 12 men, 12 graves. The last was filled not with a body, but with a memory. Dusthaven could keep its silence. He would carry the rest. Jeb rode west again before sunrise. Alone, no guns, no rope, no list, just dust behind him and horizon ahead. He didn't know where the road would take him, but it would be away from laughter, away from silence, away from graves. And somewhere, far behind, a banker stood beside a hole in the ground, staring at a single card in the dirt. The card didn't move. The wind didn't lift it. Because some graves don't need a body, just the truth. And the truth had been delivered. What would you have done if you were in Jeb Callahan's place? Would you have walked away or dug every grave? Stories like this remind us that silence has a cost, and that justice, once denied, always finds a way back. If this tale made you feel something or left you thinking, leave a comment below and share your thoughts. And if you want to keep exploring powerful stories of justice, redemption, and the forgotten voices of the West, make sure to subscribe to the channel.